Good morning, everyone.
Hi, good morning.
No, I didn't see it in Europe at all. Just, I think, a lot of times to Japan, but I've never been to Korea.
So it's 6 minutes past the hour. So I guess it would be good if we could begin. So I invite you to take your seats. So welcome to this workshop on public policies to deploy IPv6 in developing countries and the successful international experiences, which has been co-organized by Mexico, by the IFT and LACNIC. We thank our organizers for hosting us. And the speakers for this session will be Tania Villa Trapala from the Telecommunications Institute in Mexico, Valentina Scialpi from Next Generation Internet European Commission, Rosa Delgado, chair of the IPv6 Council in Peru, Paul Wilson from APNIC, Laura Kaplan from LACNIC, Carolina Aguirre from University of Santiago and UBA in Buenos Aires, and Rajesh Sharia, the president of the ISPAI in India and the director of the NICSI, the National Internet Exchange of India. So the idea of this session is to listen from our speakers on successful cases of IPv6 deployment in developing countries and how public policies have fostered this deployment, and to learn a little bit about where public policy is going into expanding IPv6 adoption. We will try to make this as interactive as possible. We are aware that you might have already been in too many workshops so far, and we don't want to make this a monologue. Instead, we want this to be a dialogue and to be constructive about it. So what we propose is that we listen to our speakers in a first intervention, and after that, we suggest that we break up in groups to discuss four main topics, which I will enumerate as the main pillars of IoT development, the importance of IPv6 deployment for the proper development for IoT. These two topics will be treated in one subgroup. And then the successful experiences for IPv6 deployment and the future of IPv4 addresses that will be dealt with in another subgroup. So the objective of breaking into subgroups is, of course, to foster the discussion between the audience and the speakers and try to reach some conclusions on the discussions to then share with the wider audience, and of course to document this output from our workshop. So I would now like to handle the floor to Tania Villa Trapala from the Telecommunications Institute in Mexico to share with us her thoughts on how public policies might aid to deploy IPv6. So Tania, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I come from the IFT, which is a telecommunications and broadcasting regulator in Mexico. And I just want to briefly talk to you about our experience with IPv6 deployment and what is happening in our country. So first of all, we needed to understand what was the status of IPv6 in Mexico. And by the beginning of this year, we had less than 1% of IPv6 traffic in our country. This was a concern for us. So what we did first was to issue a questionnaire. It was published at the IFT website. And we wanted to understand what were the main reasons for this such a 1% traffic. It's nothing. So the questionnaire was intended to be fulfilled by the ISPs, but also by the academia, by civil organizations, and the public in general. And so to make sure that we received all answers, we made it compulsory for the ISPs to answer to the questionnaire. after this exercise, we were amazed at the conclusions, because we often thought that the reason of not adopting IPv6 was some technicality, like maybe the lack of compatibility with IPv4 or something like this. But what we found out is that most of the time people don't know the advantages or the benefits of IPv6. And this lack of knowledge, it's not coming from the public in general, it's coming even from the small or medium ISPs. So then, from the regulation perspective, we also in Mexico have a very special case. There's one big player that has like more than 60% of the market. I'm not going to name them, but I guess you can guess who it is. So this player had not connected to the IXP in Mexico. In Mexico, we have only one IXP. So we made it mandatory for this big player to connect to the IXP and also to accept IPv6 connections. This happened in July this year. In November, so last month, the IFT has published the minimum technical requirements for interconnection between telecommunication networks, and it is mandatory that within 4 years, all interconnections should be using IP technology, and IPv6 is mandatory. So lastly, to tackle the problem of the lack of information, in the following weeks, we will be launching a microsite, which is an individual web page within the IFT website that will include information about IPv6, training material, also the tools to communicate with final users to answer their questions, and also that we will publish a best practices manual. And this is intended also for other government institutions that are trying to transition to IPv6. And also, whenever the government wants to purchase IT systems or equipment, we propose that it's mandatory that it should require IPv6 connection. So all in all, this, we know that regulation alone will not solve the problem, but we also know that the development of professional skills is very important. And it's not, we have been seeing an increase in IPv6 traffic. Last week, we had already 5% of IPv6 traffic. I know it's maybe not that much, but remember, it's 5 times what we had 6 months ago. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tania. So what I take from what you've just told us is that in some way the Telecommunications Institute in Mexico is hoping that by making it mandatory for the dominant player in the market to adopt IPv6 and by requiring the government to acquire equipment that is IPv6 ready, then hopefully the deployment of IPv6 will actually grow. Is that right?
Yeah, because whatever the biggest ISP does, it will highly reflect on the whole market because it's more than 60% of the users. And we think that also with this player being in the IXP, it will foster the development of more IXP networks points, because we talked to the people that are managing the IXP in Mexico. It's a non-profit organization, and they were telling us they want to open more IXPs, but if the biggest ISP is not there, the others don't want to come, because in the end they want to connect with the biggest network. So yes, we are hoping it will foster the deployment.
Thank you very much, Tania. I would now like to give the floor to Valentina Shalpi. And Valentina, the floor is yours. I'm really sorry. So next I have Rosa Delgado. So Rosa, would you like to share your thoughts on the Peruvian experience on IPv6 deployment?
Hello. Yes. Yes, well, before everything, thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm really very pleased here. I just wanted to tell you a bit the story about Peru, because for about a year and a half, Peru was really the start of IPv6, and I think it was something very important for Peru in the case that today in the academia, in the universities, in the private sector, even government people knows what is IPv6, but I think it stops about that, but at least they know that probably some benefits will come with it. What happened in Peru, it was that in year 2009, Telefónica of Peru realized that they didn't have more addresses, IPv4 addresses for Peru by 2012. No more addresses at all. So, well, they were deciding what to do because they had 3 years to go. And at that moment, Telefónica of Madrid was looking for a country where to start from scratch, a country. I mean, Telefónica, the majority of operators, even in 2011, 2012, didn't know how to move a full country, a full region into IPv6. And I think Telefónica, they needed that. They need a test bed. Peru was chosen. At that moment, they start to do the project, and what Telefónica did, it was not to pass some users to IPv6. He passed the whole number of users of Lima. Lima was almost, for Telefónica, almost in IPv6, all the users of Telefónica. So what happened at that moment is that all of the people, the users, start to create the traffic in the IPv6, and everybody was saying, what happened with Peru? I mean, it was even on the 5th place in the world at that time. And everybody was very surprised, including Telefónica, I must tell you. So that was a good point for us at that moment, because that has made push maybe governments and especially private sector to think a bit more about how important is ICT for companies, for the government. I must tell you, there's not much movement, but in this year, in 2017, the government decided to put a law what all the offices of the state offices will move to IPv6, will start to move by 2018. So some things are happening, and I think it was very good for us. But also wanted to share with you that countries like Ecuador, like Bolivia, suddenly they were first in the list on IPv6 traffic. Countries like they never been before the first on technologies. So I think it's been moving sometime in the countries in the Pacific, which more or less the traffic or the innovation was on the Atlantic side with Uruguay, Argentina, Brazil. This time there was a shake on the Pacific, and that for me has been very, very good. But anyway, I think we're still there. What I find the problems, I don't know if the will be about the barriers, but I can tell you the barriers in Peru are, again, like in most countries, capacity building. We're trying to build up workshops, events but I think one of the main problems I find, at least in Peru, is that the main staff, the management staff in the government, in the academia, and in the private sector do not know what's IPv6 and do they know how they can really take benefit of that. And I think for the moment we are trying with universities for starting in 2018, start to make workshops or even courses about top-level management of private sector, academia, and the state, to tell them, to explain them how they can benefit from IPv6. For us, the problem is not to move anymore to IPv6. We are there, but we're not using very much. So I think that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosa. This is a different experience from what I've heard from Mexico. It seems to me that while Mexico is trying to make mandatory deployment of IPv6, then the counterpart in Peru seems to have been adopting IPv6 by the rules of the market as the main player, the mobile player, which I believe is one of the boosters to this end. deployed or made Peru a pilot project for IPv6 deployment. So it's very interesting to see how both models may play differently and with, of course, different challenges and different rates of success. So now I would like to handle the floor to Paul Wilson to share with us some thoughts and experiences on IPv6 deployment.
Thank you, Leon. I'm Paul Wilson from APNIC. We're the IP address registry for the Asia Pacific, so we're responsible for managing IP addresses V4 and V6 around that part of the world, along with 4 other regional internet registries that operate today. So we've been allocating V6 addresses and supporting V6 use by our members for many, many years now. And we've been talking about it for many, many years, including here in the IGF. And I guess it doesn't need to be argued anymore that IPv6 actually is a necessity eventually for the growth of the internet, whether it's the so-called IoT, which is actually just the internet, or traditional growth of the internet through the normal deployment through cable and mobile usage. It's growing rapidly. It'll keep on growing rapidly, and it'll keep going for many, many years. It really doesn't need to be argued, I hope, anymore, just on the basis of the numbers that 4 billion addresses available in IPv4 is just simply not enough to allow the internet to keep growing the way it was designed to be built in the first place. If we go back a couple of years, there were genuine debates going on about whether IPv6 would succeed at all, because it really had been sort of bumping along the bottom for many years. We'd been talking about IPv6 for well over a decade, and the deployment wasn't happening. But I'm glad to say that those debates are actually over now. Undoubtedly, for the last couple of years, there's been a very healthy exponential growth, which has brought us now to about 15% of all users in the world having IPv6 capability. So that's a huge number of users using the internet on a daily basis, using IPv6, close to 1 billion users. At the content end, Google was one of the drivers. They've hit 20% of their traffic being delivered over IPv6, which again is a vast amount of traffic. So no one can doubt anymore that IPv6 is here to stay, because these changes are very rapid, and they seem to be continuing. I'm often asked about what is the role and the future of IPv4, because of course IPv4 is all over the internet. In fact, you still these days cannot connect to the internet in a full way without having access to IPv4 addresses from your endpoint, because there's a lot of content and services which are available only on IPv4. And so the IPv4 internet is also continuing to grow because the internet grows and V6 is being deployed, but many providers, for all sorts of reasons, are continuing to use IPv4. And the fact that the addresses are almost exhausted sort of raises the question about where the address space is coming from for fueling the IPv4 internet growth. And basically, there's a couple of sources of addresses. You either have from your local internet address registry, you have availability of a very small amount of IPv4 address space for every network that needs it. And we make that available because, as I say, V4 is still absolutely essential for connectivity to the internet. But the way that V4 address space needs to be used is through network address translation, which is the technology that allows one address to be shared by potentially thousands and thousands of users. And that's exactly the sort of downside of continuing the IPv4 internet, is the fact that you're using network address translators, sometimes in 2 layers, that takes your packets from the internet, translates them through up to a couple of stages of intermediary address space, and that all has to happen in real time in the course of every connection and every packet that flows on the net. We've got another session later this morning, actually, about carrier grade NAT and network address translation. So I won't go on about that here, except to say that it's a huge cost impost and a huge efficiency impost on the internet. So that in itself provides a great incentive to be using IPv6, but it doesn't sort of prevent the need for IPv4 while IPv4 is still in use on the internet. So the other way that you can get more substantial amounts of IPv4 address space is now on an open market. So it is possible in much of the world to if you need IPv4 address space, then if you can find a consenting donor, you can make an arrangement to purchase address space and have that transfer of address space properly registered in the RIR databases, which is an essential part of using that address space. So there is a market. It's not a very transparent market. It's hard to say what's going on out there, but the sort of average benchmark figure as a price for an IPv4 address is about $10 per address. And that's actually a relatively small amount in terms of the per user use of that address space, because an ISP might actually assign that address space, that address permanently to a user and earn about $10 a month from that address, which against a $10 purchase price is pretty good. Or they might take that address and share it amongst thousands of users at effectively a cost of less than a cent per user, again for a $10 cost. But you don't buy individual IPv4 addresses individually. You buy them as an ISP, or you need them as an ISP in large blocks. And so a very large ISP, for instance, that might need what we'd call a /8, a large block of addresses of 16 million addresses, that kind of amount of address space is worth $160 million. So that becomes a much different prospect in terms of where that financing is coming from. So we're not seeing a huge amount of movement of IPv4 addresses in this way, and that's okay, because the alternative to all of this is to get moving on IPv6, and that's exactly what ISPs are doing, weighing up all of both the technical and the financial aspects of V6 transition and deployment, and making decisions in their own way, in their own time, to deploy addresses. And as we've heard, it could be happening on a city basis. It could be happening on a service basis. The most successful examples that we see are what we call greenfield deployments, because if you don't have an existing network, if you want to build a new service, then IPv6 is available, and it's possible to do that. And probably the best example that we have of that at the moment, which has shot India into the second place globally in terms of percentage deployment, and the first place in terms of the number of users, that's the case of Reliance Jio in India. And I guess Rajesh might have a bit to say about that, because it's really the leading and best example out of many, actually, of a successful industry IPv6 deployment these days. But I've probably said enough, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, for these very interesting points. And I take from what you said that we have challenges ahead by IPv4 exhaustion. The pool has depleted, and of course the network address translation as a downside of this exhaustion, and of course what you said, IPv6 is here to stay. So I would like to give the floor to Laura Kaplan from LACNIC to share her experience and thoughts with us. So Laura, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. There. My name is Laura Kaplan. I'm from LACNIC, that is the RIR that allocate resources for Latin America and the Caribbean. I'm not going to speak about a specific case, and I don't want to repeat what Paul just explained, that is that IPv6 is here, is now. The RIRs have been working in promoting the need to deploy IPv6 for the past more than 10 years. We are working in this together as a group, promoting not only the need, but also benefits that comes with the deployment of IPv6. I would like to speak a little bit about the role that the governments can have, the importance of pushing the licitation on to buy equipments that are available to connect not only IPv4 but also IPv6. We have the danger in our region, in Latin America and the Caribbean, to get stuck with equipment or still invest in equipment that are not IPv6 ready. And we are now, for our region, between 40 and 60% of deployment. So imagine we have not only a lot more to grow in which is the connecting devices, but also more than 40% of our population. So the need to grow is really huge. Also, from the RIRs, we push the model of a multi-stakeholder way of working. So there is not only one actor that should take care of this. We believe that there is a whole sectors that are involved, ISPs, academy, governments, also the technical community. As our colleagues from Mexico and Peru, we are also very engaged in capacity building. The fact that we were promoting this for the last 10 years was not enough to get the message that the IPv6 is, the transition to IPv6 is the real solution and is the sustainable solution. Also, it's very important to work with not only the engineers or the technical that are related daily to this use, but also the people that are taking the decisions of investment in the companies. So capacity building is not always just to understand how to use or to turn to IPv6, but also to get the people that take that decision to make the transition about the benefits. And there's a lot of benefits. For example, the main benefit is that it's going to be the sustainable solution for getting the population that is not connected in internet, and also to keep to accomplish the use of many more devices that the IoT is now in the need. So I wanted to talk about the traceability, for example, that is also a benefit. Is safer. You can. It's easier to follow and to sustain the assignment of these resources. So, and the thing that the all sectors are connected and are working in the same way is important to get all on board. All not just as a country or as a government, but as a different multi-stakeholder group. So that's what I wanted to emphasize. And I give the floor to the next one.
Thank you very much, Laura, for your intervention. What I take from it is that you see government, or LACNIC sees government as a key player in deployment, as wide adoption by governments of IPv6 equipment could actually boost IPv6 deployment, and also that one incentive that public policy could be looking at is that the more IPv6 we deploy, the more population that is not yet connected could have actually access to the internet. I would like you to expand a little bit on a topic that you touched, that's transferability of resources. You said that it was safer. And, would you mind expanding a little bit on this idea of why you see this as positive?
As you know, the RIRs are the ones that are responsible for allocation of resources. So in the situation that we are having now with IPv4, is getting the bad use of IPv4 is not the way to go, and turning to IPv6 is a more complete and is a more sustainable way for the IRRs to really keep the register working as it has to be. And this is going to resolve a lot of problems of connectivity that we are maybe reaching now. So that's why traceability is one of IPv6 benefits.
Thank you very much, Laura, for expanding on that. Now I would like to give the floor to Carolina Aguirre to share some thoughts with us on the same topic. Carolina?
Thank you, Leon, and thank you, the organizers. I would like to thank the organizers for setting up this panel and for inviting me. Firstly, I mean, this panel is about IPv6 and IoT. And Paul just mentioned, I mean, that the IoT is just the internet, and I totally agree. But what we have here is IoT becoming a big driver. I mean, connecting objects to the internet becoming like a major driver, a major incentive to deploy and develop IPv6. And we've just heard very interesting experiences in different regions and two Latin American countries on the major kind of incentives that governments have learned in the last years on what they need. I mean, the major incentives that they need to promote in their environment in order to, for IPv6 to be deployed. And continuing with Laura's intervention, my intervention in this panel is briefly concentrated in also in looking at the role of governments in the expansion of IoT and IPv6 together. And one of the first issues I would like to raise is something that has been considered in the literature and the best practices around the world recently is the role that, for example, the German government took in developing the whole industrial complex around IoT and artificial intelligence with the Industry 4.0 as a major concept where all the industries from the traditional sector are interconnected with this new with IPv6 and technologies that will interconnect objects and promote the use of artificial intelligence. So here we have a very interesting role of governments in envisioning what kind of in promoting the vision they have for their productive sector, where the development of the internet and the ICTs and interconnectivity is completely related with the future economic growth of any country and their industries, be they traditional or be they coming from the ICT sector. The other thing is that we see is that governments also play a major role as agenda setters. So if governments don't buy in and don't promote the relevance of IPv6 to enable IoT deployment, to enable smart cities, for example, to enable Industry 4.0, then we are still lacking a very strategic player in this field. So the agenda setting and the role of agenda setters that governments have to play here are essential. And we have seen the work of RIRs in the last decade in all parts of the world. I mean, pushing, I mean, the demand. I mean, trying to generate and foster the demand for IPv6, and we still have an imbalance, regardless of the fact that those numbers are growing and that we have very interesting and positive experiences. There is still scope for growth in terms of having a demand and not just being pushing the demand constantly, which is something that we have seen, and that it's a strategic role that IRRs are playing in this respect. Another point is governments have to be adopters themselves of this technology. I mean, there's this whole thing about, oh, it's the private sector driving it, and yes, but if the public administration is not even itself aware that they have to be the flagships of this development, and they have to have in their own public administration IPv6 already, and routers are accepting IPv6 traffic, etc. I mean, it's just part of the whole idea of being a role model and adopting this major role. And the other very significant roles that governments have to play, which some of my colleagues have already mentioned here, is our training and capacity building. The development of startup ecosystems, I mean, that is essential, and that is something that in the country where I live, in Argentina, so there is this ecosystem, this movement of entrepreneurs around the traditional ISP sector, which want to engage with IoT, but they are asking for the government to develop clearer rules of the game in terms of what will be the ecosystem and the regulation for them if they embark in this kind of new business model for them as well, which includes IoT. So setting up this ecosystem for startups is another interesting role for governments. Of course, standard setting efforts and literacy on these standards, the basic research, promoting basic research on IPv6 is also something that governments and through ministries of education, universities, and can also develop. And also thinking about maintaining an environment where competitiveness and openness is part of a founding principle of this ecosystem. No? I mean, if we don't have openness and competitiveness, then it will be difficult to think about interconnecting smaller environments or smaller networks into the larger network. So these are the main points I wanted to share at this first stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carolina. So I take it that the German experience was successful because government was more a facilitator than a mandated imposer of IPv6 deployment, and there's also cases in Argentina of startups that are seeing lack of regulation as a chilling effect for embarking on IoT enterprises. So this is one more time an interesting mixture of how we see one sector of the population needing some regulation, while others are not really asking for regulation, but for facilitation. So I would now like to handle the floor to Rajesh Sharia to share his experience on the Indian case. Rajesh.
Thank you, Leon, and the organizers for giving the opportunity. Good morning to all. India is always the late starter in any field, but when we start, we surpass everybody. The same was into the mobile. Initially, we were struggling how to deploy the mobile, and after a few years, we have surpassed 1 billion. Now we are the second largest after China. The same is in broadband. Our target was 750 million by 2020. We have already touched 465 million till date, and we hope that 1 billion will be by 2020. The same story is with the IPv6. Initially, we were struggling how to deploy, how to put, and how to facilitate. Now, as Paul mentioned, we are the second largest in the world after Belgium, 51%. And thanks to our new operators, and even the old incumbent operators also, Because when we have to meet the target, when the smart city project is there, IoT is there, M2M is there, we require the IP. In the absence of IPv4, the only remaining solution is the IPv6. And we started adopting that. Hardware manufacturers, software guys has supported us a lot and given this opportunity how to deploy. Reliance Jio, as Paul mentioned, is one of the largest, and we have surpassed this IPv6 from last year only, 2016, and right now around 88% by the Jio, 34% by the Idea, and the Vodafone is still on 23%. The good thing what our government is able to do, Carolina, thanks for putting this thing for the government. Our government come out with the roadmap on the IPv6. 2 roadmaps has come, and they never mandated to the private sector. What they have done, they have mandated to the government department that you all department has to be IPv6 enabled by the end of 2016, but somehow they have missed that target. Now the 2017 is the final given date. And they have also requested and advised all the operators to be IPv6 enabled network, whether the demand is coming from the customer side or not, but your network should be IPv6 enabled. And at the same time, they have advised to the Ministry of HRD Academia to put IPv6 as their curriculum into the study course, so that the new youth who are coming for the job or for the networking engineer, they should know what is IPv6 and how to deploy that. So this helps us in capacity building also. So this multi-purpose task taken by our government and the private sector in the true multi-stakeholder approach had helped us in deploying IPv6 in a good way. In 2012, India was awarded the NIR by APNIC in the name of IRIN. And as a director of NICSI, I was there to see the best international or best practice into the NIR into the Asian Pacific region. I must thanks to Akinori-san. We visited Japan for getting experience about the NIR, and he has helped us in such a way that India was able to build their own network of software of NIR successfully. And Mr. Akinori-san, this is only due to you. You have guided us a lot. And the same was with Taiwan, Dr. Kyoi. He also arranged the visit of IPv6 lab in Taiwan, which was used in day-to-day life. In 2011, I'm talking of, when the Taiwan is in 2011, we are talking of the IPv6. We learned from them also. Now the requirements are coming of the IPv6 when general public or households are requiring the IP addresses for their home devices, whether it's an air conditioner, whether it's a TV, whether it's a oven, microwave oven. Slowly, the things have coming in the right way. And I hope that after the deployment of Bharat Broadband Network Limited by our government to connect 125,000 villages with the optical fiber to provide them the broadband services at their doorstep, we hope that very soon India will be #1 into the IPv6 deployment, and we will be successful in our slogan of connect the unconnected. So this is the story of IPv6 in India. IPv4 necessity is very important for a network. Few years back, I think in 2008, 7, 8, a proposal has come into the APNIC from the India side for allocation, for minimizing the allocation of IPv4, so that the exhaustion should be increased for a time, so that the newcomer or the startup should also get some flavor of the IPv4, because right now IPv4, what we feel is the network, and IPv6 slowly is going to take over this network. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rajesh. This is very refreshing, I think, because you've told us that an integrated ecosystem in a truly multi-stakeholder way of doing things has been actually successful in achieving this rate of IPv6 deployment. And we see another example of how the government, instead of mandating the private sector to deploy IPv6, they instead mandated the public sector to adopt IPv6. So we cannot deny that the governments play an important role in IPv6 deployment, but we need to find the formula, the right formula, to have a fruitful participation of governments rather than a directive role or a steering role from governments, from what I've heard from all my colleagues here in the panel. And it also, alliances with external players seem to have played a very important role in the deployment, like you mentioned, the alliance with Akinori and academia, which seem to have brought fruits to your table. So do you want to comment?
You are right, Leon, that government has played a good role. Even our association, ISPI, who I am chairing, we are doing SANOG from last 7-8 years regularly every year. And the main task of doing SANOG, and now from this year onward, 2018, we are going to do the INOG, where we are going to the tier 2 city for the capacity building, so that the youth of that tier 2 city or the rural guy should be able to learn the networking, especially the IPv6 and security, which is the necessity for the broadband penetration.
Thank you very much, Rajesh. So I think that we have remote participants, and I'm not sure if there are questions from remote participants, but now we would like to break into groups so we can further discuss 4 main topics. And these main topics would be the main pillars of IoT development, the importance of IPv6 deployment for the proper development of IoT. This will be one group. And I think that Carolina and Laura will be helping us in facilitating the discussion here. And then we have the successful experiences for IPv6 deployment and the future of IPv4 addresses, which I think Paul could help us in facilitating the discussion. And I guess, Rajesh, you would be also very good in helping us with this. And of course, Tanya, if you want to add yourself to this group. But I remain with three questions. It seems to me that this is some kind of an egg and chicken situation, because you don't have IPv6 deployment because the providers don't seem to have the incentives to invest in IPv6 equipment because they say that they don't have the demand. So it's like we're stuck in that. And I also have the question about is it public policy to force IPv6 deployment the answer to IPv6 deployment, or is it rather public policy that will create market incentives for IPv6 deployment instead the right path to take? And I think that many of these issues have been put on the table by our panelists. So now, Kevin, would you like to break into groups so we can discuss, and we could discuss the topics for maybe 30 minutes, and after that, I would invite you to give us your conclusions so we can share them to all the groups. So let's break into groups. Yes, Kevin. Okay. Okay. Good. Yeah, don't rush. Okay, so we have until 10:15 to discuss, and after that we will come back and share our conclusions.
Hello, those who are interested in this corner, those who are interested in the V4, V6 addressing issues, please relocate and join us over here. Thank you.
issue is when you do this, there is still just 30 to 40% traffic going in Newport, so the rest of the 60 to 50% of traffic is still Newport. So how much of your traffic is visual hospital? That is included. So we use the top Alexa 550, so we know quite a bit of it, and we can do physical sites to analyze how much if you need to use it. So the amount of data going over there is throughout the coast line. We're actually in a situation where we're growing quite fast. There are no more passengers. So we've already been through 3 transactions of IPv4. Transfers, yeah. We both are IPv4 address. So the challenge for us is if we decide to go to 6, that's basically just an idea. Something that we should do, we need to do, so we can grow. However, business side of it doesn't change, because we still need to be able to either be TV now, or set you up, or we need to stop TV before. It is, no, for sure not, because they're actually disconnected. So how can you promote more power? Generally, you have to do it. In Norway, we have over 50% of the websites still not being known before IPv6. You've analyzed it, if you are discussing with the IPv6, what percentage of the traffic is being used? Yeah, 30%, depending on the time of year. Because the top five changes all the time due to what's popular. So there are interesting challenges that I see with the other. Kind of finding a way to promote both sides, not just transport and data. Those are the things. I work at an application that included also some bandwidth constraints where we have a small number of large ISPs who have received a very challenging equipment transfer infrastructure. And we have essentially stopped any experimentation on the IPv6 sector. There's other ways to do that and on the other side, you know, politics, there's been expanded competition. There has been recognition for carriers and operators being one championing research we need to upscale the regulators. But even so, discussions around incentives and around like tax free input have met with a fair amount of apprehension because no one trusts that the service providers will take advantage of that and claim that everything that is imported is did so definitely tax front. That kind of environment that we're in. So the current recommendation has to do with getting discrimination into the list so that it becomes a mandatory component for anyone who is doing engineering, engineering, so that you get the tax guidelines and not getting some so we're at this point where we're not seeing a type of introduction that we know is good. I know that it's not compromised. From my standpoint, that is a reasonable thing to write. There is no immediate authority system investment expected from the standpoint. But we see from a policy standpoint, from a development standpoint, there should be some way to at least expect a pilot from small pilot. Easier said than done, but that competition is likely. You were saying before that ISPs do the networking for the good thing that expanding internet penetration in developing countries will be not really needed that happen. We use that
Okay, everyone. So it's time for us to wrap up. So if you could please take your seats again, and if you feel like you have still a lot of issues to discuss, of course, coffee is abundant. So feel free to continue your discussions. So please, I would ask our panelists to wrap up the discussions and join us at the table so we can share the conclusions from each of the groups with the wider audience. Okay, so thank you everyone for a very fruitful discussion. I could see that some discussions were actually very heated, so that's a good sign. I would now like to handle the floor to our panelists to present the conclusions on the different groups. And I would now go first with Laura Kaplan, so to give us a very brief wrap-up on the discussions, please.